welcome to the Deep Dive. Our job is to take these incredibly dense, sometimes contradictory sources and, well, give you the intellectual shortcut to what really matters.
And today, we are really getting into it.
We are. We're looking at one of the most foundational claims in human history, the origin of the world. We're cracking open ancient Mesopotamian texts, specifically the Enuma Elish, and looking at how they influenced, well, everything that came after. Genesis, the Quran.
And we are operating from a really revolutionary thesis. It's from Safa Kaçmaz, and it argues that for millennia, we've all been reading these documents completely wrong.
Whoa. Okay, let's unpack this. So the standard view, the one you and I and pretty much everyone else grew up with, religious or not, the default assumption
is that the Enuma Elish is a story of cosmogony. It's about the creation of the cosmos, the stars, the planets, the whole universe.
And that's precisely what we're challenging today. The core claim here is that these texts, they aren't cosmic at all. They are stories of sociogony.
So it's the creation of social order, political, legal, institutional order. They're describing the birth of states and alliances, not the birth of the physical universe.
That is a staggering reframing. I mean, that implies that both traditional religious scholars and their secular Enlightenment era critics,
right,
the people who spent centuries debating whether or not God actually created the sky, they were all operating inside a flawed framework from the start.
They were asking the wrong question in the wrong arena. They accepted the premise that theology laid out for them instead of just analyzing the source material for what it actually describes. And to see that, let's start with the biggest assumption of all, the myth of ex nihilo.
Creation from nothing.
Exactly, a cornerstone concept for so many later religions.
But you're saying it's not there.
It is structurally absent from these Mesopotamian source texts. When you read the earliest literature, the story never ever begins from an absolute void.
Okay, so if they don't start from nothing, where do they start?
They always start from a state where water already exists. The foundational elements aren't, emptiness, they're differentiated water. You have Apsu, the fresh water, and Tiamat, the salt water.
So right there you have two distinct things.
You have two distinct entities with names, with form, with personalities even. So you can't conceptually claim creation from nothing. Existence is already there, it's just chaotic, unorganized.
We see that in the famous opening lines of the Enuma Elish, part that says, when above the heaven had not been named, below the earth had not been called by name.
That phrase is absolutely crucial. The text is not talking about a lack of existence. It's describing a state of unregulated existence.
Regulated.
The sky and the earth were there, but they were unnamed. And if something doesn't have a name, a definition, it just means it lacks status in the institutional order. It doesn't mean it doesn't physically exist.
So it's like saying a mountain range is physically there, but until we call it the Himalayas and draw its borders on a map, it doesn't have any legal or institutional reality.
That's a perfect analogy. It's the institutional act of definition that matters, not the physical act of creation.
So if the whole point is defining status, not inventing atoms, what status is being defined? And this is where it gets really interesting. This is where theology comes crashing down from the heavens to a riverbank.
It really does, because you have to recognize the political geography that's just baked into the Sumerian-Akkadian language. The ancient tablets show this incredibly deep geopolitical equivalence.
An equivalence between what?
Between their words and their world. So the term for earth, the ground, is a direct equivalent for Sumer. Geographically, that's the south, the lower Mesopotamian floodplain where the dark-headed people lived.
And the concept of sky or heaven?
That is Akkad. Geographically, the north, the upper region. So this entire grand creation narrative is actually a very sophisticated, let's call it a diplomatic document. It's a foundational text meant to regulate the relationship between these two enormous and often competing political entities.
So the true setting of the myth isn't the edge of the galaxy, it's the Mesopotamian floodplain.
Right.
The geographical separation is centered on the Euphrates River, and it defines the northern territory Akkad, the sky, and the southern territory Sumer, the earth.
And once you put on that political lens, the verbs they use for creation suddenly make so much more sense. They stop sounding like, magical cosmic acts.
What kind of verbs are we talking about?
Strong, deliberate political actions. Tearing away, segregation, distancing, cutting.
Those sound like things a surveyor does. or a lawyer drawing up a treaty, not a god making a universe.
Precisely. They are purely institutional and political actions. The separation of sky and earth is the formal delineation of spheres of influence between Sumer and Akkad. The chaos, the undifferentiated water, was just the time before that political boundary was drawn.
Okay, so if the separation of sky and earth is a political treaty, then we have to completely rethink the main character, the god Enlil. He can't be a cosmological creator god.
Absolutely not. Enlil isn't conjuring worlds out of thin air. He is the regulator. He's the boundary setter. His power is completely derived from organizing this alliance, from drawing the lines of authority and establishing the central mechanism that keeps Sumer and Akkad in a working relationship. He's the first central authority figure.
So his primary creative act isn't making matter, it's the institutional act of naming things.
Naming is the key. That's what turns raw material into an institution with recognized status. Think of it like defining an article in a constitution. The concepts already exist, but the name, the formal definition, gives them power and a place in the new order.
You know, this new perspective seems to solve what always looked like a really bizarre, almost absurd structural flaw in the source texts.
I think I know where you're going with this.
In the early hymns, the creation of the sky and the earth, it's treated in the exact same way, with the same importance as the creation of things like animals, plants, the hoe, the pickaxe.
The grain goddess, the garment goddess.
Yes. If you're trying to read this as a cosmic story, it is completely nonsensical. It's so unbalanced. Why would a god spend the same ritual energy defining the stars as defining a garden tool?
A pickaxe, right. It really does put a pickaxe in the whole idea of pure cosmic creation, doesn't it?
It really does.
But from the sociogonic view, it is perfectly logical. All of those items, sky, earth, the pickaxe, the grain goddess, they're all foundational institutions. They're all necessary concepts for this new political structure.
So the pickaxe isn't just a tool. It represents the entire economic system of agriculture, of labor, of resource allocation that this new Sumer-Akkad alliance has to define and control.
Exactly. The sky is the North's sovereignty, the earth is the South's, and the pickaxe is the shared economic system. They are all being recognized and defined at the same time in this one foundational ritual. They are all political or economic institutions of equal importance to building this new society.
Wow.
And this clarity also changes how we see the geography in the myths. You know, the mountain motif, it's often read as some cosmic peak touching the heavens.
Yeah, a cosmic mountain.
Well, it's actually the designation for the temples or the sacred centers that were mutually opened between Sumer and Akkad. The temples weren't just buildings, they were the physical proof of the new alliance. They were political sacred landmarks, not geological ones.
And when you lay this over the actual historical data,
Yeah.
the thesis just seems to lock right into place. I mean, we know that ancient calendars, like the Assyrian one, they cite these creation days.
Right.
And they correlate precisely with periods in Mesopotamian history when huge alliances and centralized power structures, the very things this myth describes, were being established.
It's not a coincidence. The myth is a formal, poetic, and institutional record of a massive political transformation. It's a justification for the new central authority written into their most basic story. The myth isn't predicting the future, it's recording the recent past and setting up the current political order.
And this framework suddenly explains why the pattern keeps showing up in later religious texts. If you look at the Quran, for example, it describes the heavens and earth as having been joined together before Allah separated them. That's the Enuma Eli pattern, not ex nihilo.
Yes, it describes separation, not creation from nothing, and you also still see the enduring presence of water as the primary element, just like in Genesis. The idea that the divine throne was upon the water, it just reinforces that the world began not with an empty void, but with a formless, watery mass that needed order imposed on it.
Which brings us back to the most potent critique this whole thesis makes, I think, against modern thought.
It's a powerful one. When the Enlightenment happened, thinkers set out to challenge theology, but they accepted the theologian's premise. They accepted that sky is sky and earth is earth, and that these texts were about the physical universe.
So by agreeing to fight the battle on the cosmic battlefield,
They completely missed the historical and political documentation hiding in plain sight.
they spent hundreds of years arguing about whether a cosmic god created the universe, when the original authors were actually writing about which ethnic group controlled the northern banks of the Euphrates.
And who had the right to set the price of grain?
Exactly. They started from the wrong point, and because of that, this new sociogonic reading reveals that the work of both the traditional theologians and their most vocal Enlightenment critics is, well, it's fundamentally flawed. They were analyzing the wrong subject matter entirely.
The text isn't flawed, the interpretation was. That is a profound shift. The realization that these foundational Mesopotamian texts are basically the constitutional documents of their time, just disguised as cosmology. So, what does this all mean for us?
It means that when you bring theology down from the sky to the earth, the text doesn't lose its value. I think its meaning actually multiplies. History finally begins to speak clearly, and these texts can stand on their own as powerful records of political foundation, of sovereignty, and of alliance building. So, if the most foundational creation myths in history turn out to be complex documents defining political sovereignty, alliances, and border controls between states, how should we reread every single myth that comes after, that claims to explain the beginning of the world?
This raises an important question indeed.